Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is about 10 o'clock, 10:05 here on a Thursday. Looks like it might be a pretty nice day. We had a pretty kind of crappy day again yesterday, and a lot of rain. But looks sort of like it could be kind of a nice day. So it is what it is. So yeah, hope things are going good. I always like to welcome. Got a new handful of some new subscribers that just kind of came on board to the channel. So really appreciate the new personalities involved with the show, and people have been commenting quite a bit on some of these videos, and I really appreciate that. It's really all about sharing ideas. So at the end of the day, that's just super cool. Today's show is going to be about another film in this series that I started on Stanley Kubrick. So today's going to be about another movie in his amazing collection of films. So very, very excited to be talking about all these movies. I still have quite a few. I realized, I just kind of realized, wow, like, even though when Stanley Kubrick passed away, I felt like it was very, very sad. It was a very sad time. I really was enamored. By the time his last film that he had put out was Eyes Wide Shut, which I think is just I think it's a masterpiece. It's one of those movies that over time has just grown on me more and more. It's the only Kubrick movie that I got to see in the theater when it came out. And he passed away basically a week or two before the movie actually opened. And so I remember going to see. At that point, I got into Kubrick when I was in college. I was of course aware of him, and I loved his movies, but I had only seen a couple at that time. I had only seen, well, the my favorite being The Shining. I grew up watching that movie and was always scared by that movie and always enamored by that movie. And I believe the other movie I remember seeing a lot as a kid was 2001. But outside of that, I never really looked into who Stanley Kubrick was. I never really dove into his other work until college. And then when I got into college, I started getting interested in film and lots of different things, and that's when I kind of actively pursued him as where I looked into his career and sought out all the movies I could get that he directed. And I started to wanting to really learn about the man himself. So by the time Eyes Wide Shut had come out, I was a huge fan, and he was my favorite director then, and he still remains to be my favorite director. So it was going to see that movie, going to see Eyes Wide Shut was a kind of an emotional experience because it was sad. He died. He died. I feel at even though he was up there in age, I felt like he still had a lot of youth, and he still had a lot of films that he could have made, and it was really premature, and it was a sad time. But I felt also he went out on this really triumphant note, and being Eyes Wide Shut. But so since then I bought quite a few of his movies, and have taken even a deeper dive into his films. So, but that also being said, I need to. There's still quite a few movies that I need to buy of his. It's kind of a thing that I've realized. I have a good amount of his films that I own. and a few on Blu-ray. And for various reasons, I just haven't bought all of them on Blu-ray, which I need to do. So, with this upcoming year, that's something eventually that will happen. And one thing I've talked about before in this series is Kubrick, being that I think he's is and was the greatest like visionary when it came to uh, you know to the art of filmmaking. The other thing that I love about his career was how he could jump and go into so many different directions. And I feel like his ability to jump into different genres is pretty astounding. I always talk about it, but my favorite, pretty much my favorite horror movie of all time, and I feel it's my favorite Kubrick movie is The Shining. I think pound for pound the most terrifying movie ever made, the greatest horror film ever made, and science fiction. 2001: A Space Odyssey. You know, pound for pound, at the end of the day, the greatest science fiction movie ever in history. So, but then he did war movies. He did period pieces. Spartacus, Pass of Glory. He did these really taboo laced character studies. Lolita. Just an incredible diversity to his background, and also like black comedy, satire with Doctor Strangelove. So the amount of his ability to jump into many different genres, and I always talk about style, and when you are into an artist, and you get really excited by their work, or you really take to their work. A lot of those artists, one of the reasons that I feel like that connection happens for people and for myself is because that particular artist has their own voice, and they have a sense of their own style. And when you see their work or works, you can see that in all of the works that they put out. And that's a really unique thing. That's a really, really beautiful thing. But I feel to achieve that, it's really hard. I know, like for myself, I when it comes to like writing music and creating music and being involved with that process, one of the things that I try to always do is to try to create things from like a really, I don't know, like a real organic viewpoint. Meaning, I try not to go in with the idea of a real preconceived notion of that this material or whatnot has to be in this vein. I have found, just personally, in my own process, that when I go into a situation where I'm kind of creating something, it it never seems to catch my attention. It never. I can. It's hard. It feels like I can, when I go in with that in the past, when I go into that, into the process of trying to create something, it never the seed's never really there. The 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 core base of the idea never really gets established. So I try to come from it from a purely organic thing. And I feel like when it comes to music, melody is key. So if there's a melody, I know from my own process, if there's a melody kind of established, that's usually the starting point, and then usually I'll work around that. And everybody's got their own different way of kind of processing how they lay out that format to kind of create work. But I feel like if I have that and it catches my attention or someone else's attention, that is, that's the seed to an idea. That being said, this whole thing is about Kubrick, one of the biggest personal heroes for me and one of my biggest inspirations. And I would give my left arm if I could have even I don't know 1% of the genius of Kubrick in my work. That's how much I look up to him. So, but that's the thing, is it's not where I'm going to arrive. It's really, even though that's a cliche thing, I think it's a very, very poignant thing, a very poignant process and point. It's not really the destination, it's about the journey. And I just feel like that whole thing is just a continual process and cycle of hopefully, just getting better at what you do in some level, on some level. But that's how much I highly regard Kubrick, not only as a filmmaker but as an artist, and also just as a personal hero, but then also just the incredible kind of inspiration he gives me, artistically, but then emotionally, and just how I process, how I more or less try to live. And so today's show is on again, another example of the incredible diversity that he had in his career, and that is Barry Lyndon. An amazing film, 1975. It's a period drama film. It was written and directed and produced by Stanley Kubrick, and it was based on the 1844 novel The Luck of Barry Lyndon by William Makepeace Thackeray. And it stars Ryan O'Neal, Marissa Berenson, Patrick Magee, and Leonard Rossler, and Hardy Kruger. The film recounts the early exploits and later unraveling of the 18th century Anglo-Irish rogue and gold digger who marries a rich widow to climb the social ladder and assume her late husband's aristocratic position. And this movie, I feel, again, is such I think one of the quintessential kind of period pieces. I've always been a huge fan of movies that, obviously, when you see a movie, you want the story to be really great. You want the characters to be fleshed out, and you want to be able to, you want to, hopefully as a viewer, be pulled into having empathy towards those characters and caring about each of those characters on screen, and you want to see where they go and where the story goes. That's kind of what is, I think, the basic kind of tenet of an attraction to a film. But also, when it comes to period pieces, I love, really great set design. I love seeing the detail, where, if a film is shot in a particular location, like maybe if it's shot in a spaceship or outer space, or set in some haunted or creepy mansion, I want that experience to be really rich and just filled with atmosphere. And when it comes to period pieces, I've always been a huge fan of that, where the period that the story is taking place is so rich. Hopefully it's so rich and immersive, and to me that just creates that atmosphere. And when you see a film that doesn't rely on, say, kind of an artificial environment, where everything is more or less blue screen, or it's kind of a some kind of computerized backdrop, when you see a film that uses that throughout the film, as opposed to seeing a film of where, one example I can think of, you know, Ridley Scott's Alien, for instance, the Nostromo. It takes place on a ship, and but it feels like it's an actual set. It feels like it's a place where these actors and these characters have actually live in. Like I just talked about The Shining. For me, it's like the Overlook Hotel where that movie takes place it's an actual real place, but it has this this tactile thing about it where when you're watching the story, it feels like the environment is so rich with atmosphere, but it feels like it's a place that's actually been lived in. And so when it comes to period pieces, when you have that, I feel like the set design, the costuming, the costumes, the all of those technical things, when it's done really right, it's it acts, as a character into itself. And the level of detail. Another movie I think is just an amazing example of that. So, like a more modern example of just an incredible kind of period piece, I feel is uh, the movie The Witch that was directed by Robert Edgers. Just an amazing film and totally immersive. That film I've talked about a lot before. I need to do a regular review for for that movie because I just love that movie. But that movie, I've talked about it before. Where giving trying to give examples of Kubrick's influence, and The Shining was probably the biggest influence on that film for Robert Edgers. And I've talked about that whole interview that I read or that I saw with Robert Edgers, the director and writer of The Witch, where he talked about his relationship to The Shining and how he developed the idea around pacing and cinematography, and how to use the camera, how to tell a story visually, not always to not always thinking that you need to tell the story only by means of dialogue. So very interesting. But I think Barry Lyndon is one of those films also that is just oozes with atmosphere and just has such an incredible the set design. You're I feel like when you watch Barry Lyndon, and I think it happens with all of Kubrick's films, but I feel like all of his films were really great examples of like world building, of where you're transported to this really unique universe every time you watch one of his films. And Barry Lyndon is very much a period piece, and I feel like you're transformed and you're transported to that particular time period in history. All of the details, all of the design, all everything that involves the design of what you're seeing on the big screen is just so immersive and just so rich with beauty and atmosphere. And Kubrick was notorious for his insane attention to detail. And I feel like Barry Lyndon is one of those examples of where, if a film like this was done with somebody who just didn't have the amount of talent that Kubrick had, you know, it wouldn't be as the experience would not be as rich as I think it is, where you're transported to this unique period in history, and it gives you a different kind of perspective, and it's all about the immersion. And Barry Lyndon is one of those films. I unfortunately do not own this movie. Uh, I have seen this movie quite a few times. I The times I've seen it, I've only seen it on Blu-ray. Actually, no, I should say DVD. I've rented it a bunch of times on DVD over the years. But again, this is one of those movies I need to get, uh, and it's just a matter of time. But just an amazing film. Again, in the incredible collection of Kubrick's films, this movie is. I feel it's something that's really really different for what he was doing, and in comparison to all of the other films that he's done. But just an amazing film. The I think it's probably the best role that Ryan O'Neal has ever been in. He was a real famous character actor in the 60s and 70s, and just his performance in this movie is so heartfelt and just such a great story. And yeah, this Barry Lyndon again is just yet another example of masterful storytelling by Stanley Kubrick. So I highly recommend it if you haven't gotten a chance to see this film. I also feel like in the collection of all of his films, this movie is maybe a little bit. It doesn't get the attention it needs, and I think it's a little bit underrated. But it's a tremendous movie. And again, it's all at the end of the day for me. Like I've always said, for me, just my general thing that I go for a film. Even in a case of like say this, if the story might not be so great, or maybe if the film has a little bit of maybe even some hiccups along the way. But if the film has a real like deep and rich kind of atmosphere, I will probably at the end of the day really like that movie or love that movie and want to watch it again. And obviously with Kubrick, all of those things are on the table and everything is kind of immaculate or is immaculate. So, but at the end of the day, my biggest selling point for me to like a film or to love a film is really the atmosphere. If the film has this rich world that I can lose myself in, that's really at the end of the day all I'm looking for, regardless of the budget, regardless of the genre. So, but Barry Lyndon, gotta check it out if you've never seen it. So, stay tuned. I got some more Kubrick movies to review, and they will be coming up. I'm posting these videos as premieres, so I'm kind of trying to space them out a little bit. So thanks again for people checking out this channel, and keep the discussions coming, and we will see you next time. Peace.